Thinking back in your career, again, not anything I did in elementary school or middle school. Matt, what would you say is your favorite mistake professionally?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's what prompted me to obviously come on this broadcast with you, because it's a very interesting way to frame the idea of a mistake, right? A favorite one. So you have to think back and go, well, why do I cherish this particular mistake? And in this case, it's a mistake I think about all the time, probably every day, probably multiple times a day. And without doing too much backswing, I'll take you back to about 14, 15 years ago. I'm a director of operations at a major North American telecommunications provider, and my job at the time was to put tools and equipment in the hands of the sales channels to make them more efficient and more effective. And one of the things we noticed is, hey, we hire somebody, which is great, and then because we're telco, we've got about 16 different systems where we've got to provision a person. Person's got to get a commissions ID, and now I've got to get a point of sale ID, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And I thought, well, gee, there must be a better way to do this. So the moment we hire somebody and put them in PeopleSoft, there should be a system that just cascades this all the way through, and man, this is all this. Not necessarily groundbreaking, but could save us a whole bunch of time, and then even more so, stop the problems we have with commissions challenges and all the rest of it, the inefficiency that comes from fat fingering thousands of codes. So I'm about ready to go do this, and I'm given a partner to work with, and she and I get going, and we start with a reasonably small scope, reasonably small, contained. We can do this, but we're generous people. And so people say, well, could we do this? And could we do this? And could we do this? And our general answer was, well, we can try, which is another way of saying yes. And before long, we had this enormous problem on our hands, which we still thought we could manage, until we got those fateful words from IT, which basically boiled down to, well, we didn't know what we didn't know until we found out we didn't know it. Okay, so we're stuck. We're not going to hit our deadline. We're way behind. I mean, it's flaming red everywhere. If there are 20 things we have to deliver, we have a chance of delivering 6. And so my senior vice president calls this meeting together of all of his people doing all of these projects. And it's just this reckoning. How are we all doing? I want to help. This is basically a half day of, tell me how you're going. I want to help. And so my partner and I, we said, all right, well, this is our chance. Here's our plan. We're going to say, this is where we're off. This is what we're going to do to fix it. This is where we need your help. And we're going to come out of this maybe with a fighting chance. And so we were about the 5th person or 5th team to present, and the previous 4 teams were even worse than us. And so by the time he turns over to us, he says, all right, Matt, you got to tell me, you're going to deliver something really good here. And I mean, all the color drained from my face, and my partner said, that's right, we are totally on. Everything's going according to plan. You're going to be very pleased with all of this. And I was simultaneously, now the color's back in my face, I'm sure it's all red. I'm simultaneously confused and apoplectic, and I don't even remember how the rest of the meeting went. I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So I get out of the meeting and I'm like, what was that? That's not what we planned. We said we were going to talk about this and this and this and this. And she says back to me, he doesn't pay us to bring him problems. He pays us to bring him solutions. And I'm younger, and I said, okay, well, maybe this is how it goes. And everything is just as bad as it has always been. Project's way behind, and then I get this email that's invitation to a meeting in my senior vice president's office at 6:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, which is, of course, never happened. He doesn't bring me into his office at any time. Now I have this meeting, and I'm convinced this is it. This is what I'm going to get fired. So I arrive at 6:15 because I'm not going to be late to my own firing. And I walk in, and he's very gracious. He asks me if I want coffee. I sit down, and he says to me these words. He says, Matt, why don't you think I deserve the honor and respect of the truth? I just like melted into the chair, and I did like the, but, I mean, I just started coming out with stuff, and he just holds up his hand, and he goes, listen, I need you to understand 3 things. First, I've been doing this a long time. I know how to solve more problems than you've ever seen in your career. I'm the guy you come to for help. The second thing he says is, I have bosses, and my bosses expect me to tell them everything that's going on accurately and concisely. And the third thing is, I can't do that if you don't do the same thing for me. And he said, so here's what we're going to do. And he laid out a plan. And it was, of course, a plan you might expect from a senior vice president who's been doing this for 40 years. It was, all right, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix this. And he says, and I trust this is the last time we're going to have a conversation like this. And I said, yes. Yeah. And I gleefully ran out of the office. And I think about that, Mark, every day. I think about why, when I knew that I was not telling the truth, I knew I wasn't. Why didn't I, after the fact, figure out a way to be forthcoming? Even if that meeting was the wrong time, I had plenty of opportunity after the fact to say, yeah, well, here's really what's going on. And the second thing I think about all the time is how he chose to be a leader and a mentor and not just a dictator. And so I think about those things in my professional life all the time. Every meeting I go into, every interaction I have professionally from that point forward.
Wow. So, and when you talk about that story, you had a co-conspirator.
Yeah.
Was he called in separately?
I don't know.
For a talk like
as a she, not that makes one bit of difference for the story.
Yep.
I don't know. I reflect back on why this particular person was put on the project. She didn't have a technical background. I think she was supposed to maybe be a mentor and a guide for me, and maybe that's how she thought she was approaching it. But no, I don't know this. I do know that she was never on another software project, and was put into other maybe less technical projects on a go-forward basis. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So I'll apologize for my mistake in slipping up on a pronoun there, but So these.
I'm trying to protect the names.
Yes, they.
Yes, they.
We just tell stories. They. Why did they do that? But
yes.
So thanks for telling the story, and I think there's a lot we can sort of unpack from that and how it influenced you. Now, when you think of different workplaces and cultures, like I'm curious, as you're recollecting, is that a word?
Sure.
What's your recollection of? Think of the culture, right? Because there are some workplaces where leaders will say one thing, but then they demonstrate something else. The leaders will say, we want you to tell us the bad news. And then when bad news comes out, people learn, let's keep the bad news under wraps. So that could have influenced your colleague and what she did there. But do you remember were the words, and it sounded like you got good coaching.
Sure.
But did the words line up with the culture?
Well, so it's an enormous company. Right, and we'd like to think that culture is uniform across the whole organization, but in my experience, it was the reflection of the leader at the top of the organization. In some cases, even the vice president or the executive director. So you could be in a flamethrower in one part. You walk over to marketing and whoa, what's going on over here? And then you walk over to IT and maybe it's a little sleepier or whatever. In this particular case, we were not, it's a telecommunications company. We're running a retail channel. So when it comes to doing the things that make the telecommunications company money, budget goes to building a network, and then building a network, and then building a network, and to borrow from Moneyball, then there's 50 feet of something, and then there's retail, right? So our culture, we didn't have a lot of kill or be killed kind of approach. We were a lot gentler. So I think the culture reflected the senior vice president very well. But like I said, if I go into other parts of the business, it's dramatically different. And my fit in the culture at the time probably wasn't all that great. I'm a little bit kindler, gentler now as I approach a more rooted bit of middle age. But when I was younger and in my 30s, I was sure that myself, my own ambition. I could change a company founded by the guy who invented the telephone. I could do it myself. Probably not true.
Yeah. So how has, thinking about this story, I love that you use the word cherishing what happened here. That's a great word to choose. How does thinking about this influence you as a leader in terms of what you try to reinforce or how you try to operate?
Yeah. Well, it manifests itself in a couple ways. For sure, in about a year and a half or 2 years after that, I had recovered from this, and now I'm managing a team of, at its peak, 18 or 19 people. So it was in this organization, it was pretty sizable. And I remember my approach to managing everybody was a reflection of what he had done for me. But secondly, I always said that, or I always felt that my success was in the reflected glory of somebody else's spotlight. So if I hired somebody in and that person did really well, then I get the benefit of saying, hey, I coached that person, or hey, I selected that person, or hey, that person thrived under my particular leadership. So I was not about me after that moment, for sure. I was always about the other, and that's 100% of how I focus things today. And then the second thing is really, there is, what's the expression that, unlike fine wines, bad news does not get better with age, right?
Right.
If I am in a position where it's just maybe I can't be candid at that moment, I find the first available opportunity to be candid. And for an example might be if I'm in a sales situation with my current company, we do these interactive digital displays, the kinds of things that build an emotional engagement in a brand in live spaces. And not everybody's ready for that, right? There's a difference between, say, how a Sephora might approach that versus, say, Dollar General, as just an example of on opposite ends of the spectrum. And so if I happen to be walking into Dollar General, which hasn't happened, by the way, in Dollar General, if you're listening, we'd love to talk to you, but they probably don't have people who think this way today. Their readiness to do this kind of work is just not there. And if I just tell them how super ready you all are for all of this, I'm setting everybody up for failure. So what we end up doing is we talk about very candidly, here's how you have to prepare. Here's what you've got to be ready to do. Here's how you have to be ready to support this on a go-forward basis. And if we can't meet these prerequisites, then we table it until we're ready. And that's better for everybody, because if you don't have those kind of candid, open conversations in the beginning, obviously you set everybody else for failure. That sounds obvious, but that's not always the case. People just want to sell stuff because selling stuff is revenue, not necessarily because it serves the customer or the project.